when Stack and Smoke are fighting in the end, are we going to do face replacements and a little bit of body modification to make it feel like they're both the same sizes?
We were shooting in a Model T period appropriate car. So the loud engine, you have gravel road, you have the convertible top down, and he's playing an acoustic guitar and singing. I'm Chris Welcker. I was the production sound mixer on Sinners.
I'm Michael Shawver. I was the editor of Sinners. And we are going behind the scenes with Collider. One thing I didn't know before working with IMAX is that the camera sounds like a small lawnmower, and there's a do going on, which gives me so much more respect for any actor who's given a great performance close up like that, because how do you tap into that while you have that going on? But that caused us to need to find a different workflow in terms of getting good quality sound, dialogue, and everything that could be used and show millions of people. So Chris was a mastermind in helping us figure out many things, but this in particular was one of the more urgent things that we had to figure out pretty quickly on set.
Yeah, from the on-set perspective and just in terms of thinking about recording dialogue for a movie with this kind of camera, as well as like music performances, that raises a lot of concerns. And we were lucky to have about a 2-week prep where we could kind of figure out these things before actually going into principal photography. So one of the things that I benefited from is some of the people on our crew had previously worked on Christopher Nolan's prior movie, Oppenheimer. And so they had experience working with this camera, and they sort of brought a workflow from that project to this one. So the concept was that whenever we would shoot with this loud camera, which is the IMAX camera, which it's a film camera. If it had been digital, it would have been a non-issue. But anytime we recorded performances with that camera, the concept that was borrowed from the Nolan approach is that we would record a sound-only pass once we were happy with the visual performance. The idea then being that editorially, they would cut up each word, syllable, and adjust it to where it could line up with the noisy take when the camera was rolling. And that was kind of our first approach to doing this. They have another camera that we used a lot on this movie, which is this Panavision System 65. It's still a noisy film camera, but it's more manageable. And so the idea would be that whenever we would go in to do coverage and do the dialogue portion of the scene, we would then switch to that camera for those takes. But that soon kind of changed, and we started using the IMAX camera much more than we anticipated. So we had to kind of develop a new system to make those takes usable. And we got involved with our post-production sound team, who was on board with us from the very beginning of the shoot. They were able to kind of look at what we were doing, utilizing some of the noise canceling tools that they have available to them. By learning what they were doing, I was able to kind of bring some of those tools on set and use that to help inform my decision making in terms of like, where are we putting these microphones and what can we do on set that can actually give us a chance using these tools later. Working with the picture editors, Michael had an on-set editorial team that was there that we could actually, as soon as a take was over, they were able to begin cutting these things together and making these sound edits, and we could see how these things were actually coming together. It was really great that we were able to find a workflow that sped up their process. And also in the end, our dialogue editor and re-recording sound mixer had informed me that about 95% of what we recorded on set ended up actually being used in the movie, as opposed to relying on ADR.
You boys twins?
Nah, we cousins.
On set, that one was kind of another big, tricky situation to deal with. The handing off of that cigarette is something that happens. It's one thing to have actors talking to each other in a scenario where you're trying to create the illusion that Michael B. Jordan is two separate people. We started out having basically a double, a body double, and he was able to speak and respond in real time with Michael B. Jordan's dialogue. And then the timing of his performance actually created a space when we would shoot the other performance that Michael B. Jordan would do. So we basically would take that recording that happened on the first performance, and then we would remove all the dialogue where the stand-in had spoken, and we would play that back through a speaker on set. And we had a device that was able to time exactly with the camera move, because that camera was able to do these dynamic movements and repeat that move over and over again. And so we were in sync with that camera when it would start the beginning of the recording, and we were able to basically put in dialogue and those things so Michael B. Jordan could then respond to his previous performance and the other actor's previous performance. And it would leave that gap open for him to then interject with his lines. That became an evolving sort of thing. Michael asked if there was anything that we could do to help him with that timing, because some of it was a little bit different. The stand-in just kind of had a different line delivery or a speed to his performance, and that basically created a situation where Michael B. Jordan was having to like rush or elongate his performance, which was not the way that he envisioned for his thing. So we ended up actually coming up with a really great scenario where we took pre-recorded dialogue from Michael B. Jordan scene, and we would trigger it using like a drum machine type playback device on set. And so I'm sitting there watching the scene take place. We had our stand-in then just be silent and be basically an eye line for Michael B. and the other guys to look at. And I would just trigger the playback of Michael B. Jordan's pre-recorded dialogue through the speaker. And then to go one more step further, that's all the dialogue portion of it, but there's the non-dialogue aspects of the cigarette handoff, or when you want both of these twins to like walk up to a specific point on the set, maybe at the same time. And so we started implementing ADR beeps on set where we could lay those basically a series of 4 beeps, and that would give them kind of heads up like, you know, in 3, 2, 1, boom, that's when you need to land on your mark, or 3, 2, 1, boom, that's when you hand the cigarette off or take the cigarette from basically a mark on the set. So it was really interesting, like a lot of creative problem solving that was really fun to work on, and ultimately you're just there to support the actor in getting the performance that they're after.
With the twin stuff, I think one of the reasons it works is because every level of shooting it was handled with such care and artistic cleverness, I guess you could say, and problem solving. And so each specific scene was planned out with VFX to decide what's the best way to shoot it and to achieve it. Are we going to do a split screen? Is there going to be a camera move locked in? Or in the more difficult things like when Stack and Smoke are fighting in the end, are we going to do face replacements and a little bit of body modification to make it feel like they're both the same sizes? And that conversation happened at the beginning and a little bit later and a little bit later and all through post. And we work very organically. Problems are always going to come up, issues are always going to come up, but finding a solution for all these things and working as a team is one of the strengths that we have. For example, with the cigarette scene, when shooting, they would shoot one side with Mike as one of the characters, and we would pick the hero take. And whatever we thought in the moment was the best take, technically, performance-wise, everything, to then match to the other side. But it's not always the same when you're on set watching a scene as when you're in the editing room and see it on a screen together and start seeing the nuances of the performance that you don't really pick up until you're really looking at it with a focused eye. And so I leaned on what was chosen on set, but sometimes I'd want to alter it because Chris did an amazing job on set with the timings and the voice playback. But once you put a scene into a cut, it has to have a shape and a pacing, and it has to feel like a human interaction and timing and rhythm kind of thing. So it was great, but there were times where once the cameras were static and stopped, I would maybe have to slow down one side or cut some frames out and hide that cut in another side to put a little tension in the silence and let the moments kind of be what they really needed to be. But I think that everybody putting in such A+ work at every level, and then VFX could help us out with any of the differences. And specifically with the cigarette, there was a blue pole with red mark where that would be the exact moment they would pass it. So at least the cigarette pass was in the same spot, and if other things were kind of changed, VFX could help us so we could move things around. And our concern with the twins, Ryan, rightfully so, if people are watching this movie and they're conscious about that this is 2 Michael B. Jordans and he's one of the biggest movie stars in the world, so it becomes difficult to let him disappear in the role. But Mike was absolutely incredible. Every time I watch the movie, I'm more and more impressed by what he did and the choices he made and how he separated it. And I didn't even know this. I saw him on Jimmy Kimmel actually, and he said he wore 2 different size shoes for each character. One was too small, one was too big, so that when he was just in their shoes, experiencing life in different ways. All the credit to him and to Ryan and everybody else for making those scenes work.
When the IMAX camera was rolling, then it's like, well, there's no sound problem bigger than that. So you could forget about any location-based things. But there was a lot of the movie that was shot with the quieter camera, and we dealt with cicadas. There were apparently 2 different broods of cicadas that summer. So whether you had one group or the other, and sometimes they would kind of happen simultaneously. And even in some of the interior locations, like Sammy's father's church, all those windows are open, and it's in a real location. It's not on a soundstage. So having those windows open, even though you're shooting interior, you have the outside elements sonically bleeding into the space. There's this really great scene. It's at the end of the movie, like the very, very, very end, because there's like 2 post-credit scenes in this thing. And one of them where Miles is playing guitar and singing This Little Light of Mine, and he's in that church location. And it was added in at the end, and my understanding is that the post-sound team didn't do anything to the sound of that. They actually used the sound that we recorded in the mix that was done on set. So that gives you a perfect sense of the environmental conditions, because you can hear the cicadas loud and clear throughout that.
So we cut it out of the movie. He's playing in his dad's church to his dad. His dad says, hey, I want you to lead the kids in singing this Sunday, and why don't you play a little Light of Mine? And then he goes up and rips an amazing blues version of it.
We did what we could to embrace as much of that kind of noise as possible. You know, it tells the story as well, I think. So in terms of like trying to capture those noises, and we try to create as much separation from those noises that are uncontrollable and the dialogue and the musical instruments, but then capturing them in a way that gives the post-sound team the ability to bring those elements back in. It really helps to kind of smooth out any of those things that happen when you're cutting things back and forth, and the sound of the cicadas in this moment is just a little different than in this moment. So there was that. There was one particular scene where we recorded a music guitar performance. At the very beginning of the movie, Sammy's for the first time playing guitar and singing to his Uncle Stack, and that was probably the biggest challenge sound-wise, because it was shoot day 0. It actually got added before shoot day 1, and we were shooting in a Model T period appropriate car. So the loud engine, you have gravel road, you have the convertible top down, and he's playing an acoustic guitar and singing, and we had to do everything to make sure that that performance is what gets used in the final movie. When we had that 2-week window at the beginning of the movie, we did a lot to practice that whole scenario before we ever stepped foot on set, and you know, we knew the ways to like actually make that possible.
We realized that that would be the best time for the audience to hear him sing and play for the first time, because if we hear and see him play and we're impressed by him, that scene in the car just becomes us watching Stack be impressed. But if that's the first time we hear it, we'll be impressed with Stack, and therefore we'll be more engaged with the characters and Stack's experience. And when we cut it out, it wouldn't be doing Miles justice, wouldn't be doing the world justice to not hear that. And the reason why we could put it in the movie and it sounded like you were right there in front of him is because of what Chris was able to do and what our post-sound team was able to do. As an editor, I want as much footage as possible. But when you're fighting sun, you're shooting a lot of real locations, natural light type situations, you don't really get as much shot as you would if it was a controlled stage or something like that. So at one point I said, Ryan, have you thought about shooting some of the car stuff on a green screen or a blue screen, and just to get some more options and not have to worry about the light and the sound? And he said, no, I want to get the real thing. I want to feel this experience and being in this environment and how amazing and epic and beautiful and light, sound, all that stuff. And it actually allowed the actors to be more in the moment with these locations and things. What was achieved with sound is the secret weapon of this movie and the experience, because truly this movie is an experience. You walk in one person and you walk out another, and you feel like you spent time in the South. And editing sound, our job is to be effective emotionally, but invisible at the same time. And you shouldn't be thinking about it. And I think Chris and the post-sound team just achieved it tenfold.